The universal basic income, guaranteed money for all Americans. Would it have any positive impact on America, and how much would it cost? ZR Examiner takes a look. The universal basic income is not a new idea. It's basically been floating around for the past 40 years or so. Only recently has it begun to gain traction, especially amongst the more socialist leaning Democrats, such as Alexandria Ocasio Cortez and Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. Uh, the problem is there have been, in order to see if something is viable, you have to test it first. You just can't jump right into something like this and call it a success. It has to be tested. And only a handful of countries on the planet have bothered to actually test a universal basic income. And we're talking about countries like Namibia in Africa and Poland in Europe. And the programs they're offering were extremely limited and offered nowhere near what could be considered a livable wage. So it's a moot point to say that those programs prove nothing. You know, if you can't live on a certain wage, why test it? I mean, in Namibia, we're talking about like 10, $12 a month. Poland was a little more, I think like 147 to $150 a month. You can't live on that. So that's not a successful test. And so far, no nation has successfully tested, you know, this concept. Now, like I said, every major country on the planet is vying for something similar to a universal basic income. Uh, it's a big deal in Europe. France, they're toying with the idea. Germany's been toying with the idea since the 80s. India, uh, just about every major country on the planet has at one time or still is floating the idea of some form of basic universal basic income. Now, here's the only thing. The only success story so far is Macau, China. Okay, uh, Macau is a city or a province of something like 660,000 people, but it's the Las Vegas of China basically. They have a lot of money to begin with, and they offer all residents, permanent and non-permanent residents alike, a universal basic income. If you're a permanent resident, you get $1,127 a month. If you're a non-permanent resident, you'll receive $676 a month. Okay, that is still, as far as I know, an ongoing program. Uh, but it's a rich town to begin with. Okay, that leads me to the most obvious flaw in the universal basic income scenario is that no two countries are alike, meaning they don't produce the same amount of wealth, they don't require the same amount of of consumer goods. Healthcare systems are different, education systems are different. The requirements between any two countries on this planet, there is no common ground. So the basic needs, are going to differ from country to country. and the requirements of a basic income are going to be higher in your more affluent countries, like some of the European countries and the United States. Okay, there is no benchmark for a universal basic income. Okay, Germany has probably done the the most research on the matter, and what they found is basically what any logical human being would surmise if they did their own homework. The Germans basically came to a 5 point conclusion regarding a universal basic income. What they found or concluded was that, first of all, it would cause a significant decrease in the motivation to work. Okay, and why wouldn't it? I mean, if your government is going to provide a living wage for you at someone else's expense, then why work? Especially if it's going to provide everything you know that you require to exist comfortably. You know, if you don't have any long-term dreams and you just want to survive, then a universal basic income is exactly the thing you're looking for. And there are more than enough people in the world that fit that bill. Okay, the second finding uh, was it would have unpredictable consequences on the entire national economy. Okay, there's no economies are very complicated. Okay, if if your government is pumping money into the private sector, they're trying to get the consumer to spend a certain amount and save a certain amount for a balance. Okay, if consumers aren't saving, it has consequences. If consumers aren't spending, it has consequences. There's no telling, there's no way to predict how people receiving a universal basic income would spend that money. Therefore, there's no way to tell what kind of consequences it would have for the economy. Um, the third and very obvious conclusion was that it would require complete restructuring of the tax, social, and pension systems of the nation. Okay, taxes are going to go through the roof with a nationwide universal basic income. Uh, you know, we're going to get into that a little more in depth later on. But suffice it to say, a universal basic income would change everything as it exists right now. Um, Number four, it would cause a vast increase in immigration. The United States is proof of that. We have millions of immigrants come flocking to the United States every year because it's very easy to get into our social system. Okay, it's easy to come to this country and get food stamps and have the government give you money to take care of your kids, even if you're an immigrant. Okay, most European countries have a much more strict immigration policy than the United States. Even a closed border situation is going. If your government's handing out free money, people are going to flock to it. Okay, that's going to have long-term consequences. It's going to cost the government more money. It's going to cost the taxpayers more money. And finally, there simply is no viable way to finance a universal basic income. We have no idea for certain how much would be required to finance a universal basic income because we don't know how many people would apply for it. We don't know how much we're going to be handing out. We don't know how much for certain how high taxes would have to be, etc., etc. Uh, but it would be extremely expensive to say the least. We're going to cover that in just a minute. So, the reality of a universal basic income in the United States is that it will exact an extremely heavy price if implemented. And this is even at the bottom end of the scale. Okay. For the purposes of this study, we're looking at a total coverage across America. Okay, now this information I gleaned from a New York Post article. And if you're aware of the New York Post, they're a very liberal newspaper and they support, you know, very liberal ideas. Uh, According to the study covered in the New York Post article, a UBI in America would cost about $4 trillion a year. Now, that's to cover all individuals and families in America. Now, $4 trillion a year is just shy of 1/5 of the entire economic output of this nation. That's a lot of money. The basic conclusion is there is no way to fund a universal basic income without cutting existing social programs and raising taxes. Okay, we're not talking one or the other, we're talking both cutting programs and raising taxes. Now, if we were to redirect every penny that the government spends on social programs now, it would cover about 90% of the cost of the UBI. Okay, that means cutting every single social program in the United States and redirecting that money into a universal basic income of $1,000 a month. Okay, $1,000 a month to every individual family. Okay, that's a little extreme. We don't, that's not going to happen. So let's cut it down a bit. Let's say we cut just disability, Social Security, pensions, welfare, and unemployment checks. That would that would only cover 37% of the cost of UBI. Okay, that means a plethora of taxes that would throw this nation into an economic turmoil we haven't seen since the Great Depression, and probably more so. Okay, the other option is this means testing. Let's